elevated. Now it's my time to shine, yeah, let's go. Graduated, elevated. Now it's my time to shine, yeah, let's go. Major moves, power moves. Take it to the top one time non-stop. Gotta go, gotta flow. Take it to the...
Welcome to Ph.D. Hard Talk. I am Noma Mguni, your host. How are you, Moses?
Hi, I'm doing great. What about you?
I'm very well, thank you. Could you please introduce your research, university, and what you're about? And then we can crack on.
Of course. So my name is Moses Akhenaten. I am a first-year immunology PhD student at the University of Pennsylvania here in the United States. And primarily my research is revolved around HIV cure research.
Excellent. So, in terms of your research, then, because I am really intrigued and I think it's something that should be trending, just like cancer, but it's something that now we think, do you know what? It's a norm. We don't really talk about it in the news per se, but cancer is like at the forefront. To me, both of them, I think they're in equal weight. What made you think this is my passion? This is what I want to look at essentially for the next 5 years?
Yeah, of course. So I had some cancer research experience as an undergrad, and I really enjoyed it. But I also had some qualitative and community outreach with HIV. And so what to me was missing from my HIV qualitative and community outreach was that wet lab experience, seeing the molecular basis of HIV. And that really pushed me to do a thesis and a PhD regarding HIV research. And I really have a passion for one. I am a Black queer person. So coming from a community where HIV is stigmatized, I feel like I could increase the representation on not only the people who are affected by HIV, but also the people who are working on the research sides of HIV. Because if you look at the research side, it's often dominated by white, cisgender men, white heterosexual men. And oftentimes I'm the only Black queer person in these conference rooms. It could be a conference full of 100 people, and I'm probably the only Black queer person. And considering that HIV disproportionately affects my community, we should be in these rooms. We should be in these conference rooms talking about the research just as much as them, so we can actually have a effective impact on the community that we're doing research in. Because I feel like the research is just so disconnected with the community. And it's because the lack of representation of people from that community is impacting. And like I said, that really drove me to want to do HIV research in my PhD. I'm just so glad I'm here. God gave me the opportunity to do this. So couldn't be more excited to be doing a PhD at one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, especially as a underrepresented student.
I love how you've expressed yourself in terms of your community and also what you've observed, essentially, which links me to the next question. Why do you think HIV is so stigmatized? Like, where does that come from?
Yeah, so I mean, I feel like HIV is stigmatized as a gay disease primarily from the 90s and 80s, because a lot of gay men or men who were having sex with men were dying from AIDS. And it became really stigmatized that this could only be contracted through gay sex. However, when people who were also identified as heterosexual were dying as well, I think it became more prevalent to the fact that it's not just only a gay disease. And however, it does disproportionately affect men who are having sex with men, especially in communities of color. Especially here in the United States. I think if you look at the demographics, here in the United States, it primarily affects men who are having sex with men of color, so Black and Latino communities. And then I think if you look at globally, African women are most predominantly impacted, regardless of whether they're having sex with men or women. So I think it's important to break that stigma that it just not only impacts us, it can impact anyone who's sexually active or who's intimate. And by breaking that stigma, people can become more aware of how to protect themselves against HIV and take the necessary preventatives.
Thank you very much for your response. And in terms of, what you've said, it was a question that I was going to ask later on. I might as well jump into that, which is, when we look at education here in the UK, we are taught about, when it comes to sex education, I can't speak of the US because I don't know, how it works there essentially, but we don't really get into like HPV. What is HPV? Why should you be aware of HPV, for example? HIV, we don't really get that. In your opinion, having gone through the information that you've gone through, and speaking of Africa, and also, oh, I don't know if we can use this terminology in terms of BAME, Black, Asian, etc., minorities as we know them in the West, we are usually affected with according to the data. They say we have the highest percentage in terms of HIV or AIDS, essentially. How do you think we should be educated when we're in school? Because we're the ones going out into the big bad world, as our parents would say. And, how should we be educated about, HIV essentially?
Um, I would say, starting with the earlier part of your question, I feel like we are disproportionately affected because of institutional racism or homophobia.
Mhm.
And that really impacts the health disparity, the gap, because you can see in white people it's less common in white people compared to Black people. And that's because of, like I said, institutional racism and these gaps that we have in healthcare and education. I feel like oftentimes Black people don't have access to education or higher education that can educate them about these diseases and preventatives. Even getting into sexual education, mostly here in the United States, sexual education is regarding heterosexual couples. And so, when it comes to heterosexual sex ed, they hardly ever speak to HIV because HIV is stigmatized as a gay disease. And so, therefore, people aren't educated of how HIV can be transmitted or how HIV can be prevented. I don't even think they're talking about in schools how, PrEP, you can take PrEP, which is like a daily pill, which can prevent HIV. And that to me is just as important as wearing condoms or other safe sex practices. So I think education is definitely important, and having representation, people who come from the community who look like you and I, speaking back to our community, because I think there's a lot of distrust in research and science, and people aren't trusting these scientists because of things that have gone wrong, such as the NIH when they did the trial with I believe it was syphilis. They did the syphilis trial where they infected, I think it was like hundreds of Black men with syphilis. And since then, it's been really hard to gain the community's trust with science and research. And so that's why I think representation is essential to better gaining the community's trust so they can be better educated and these healthcare preventatives can be better implemented.
No, thank you very much for your response. The next question then is, why do you think it's so important for us to find a cure? Because, I mean, you've gone through, information that we are aware of. I think even here in the UK, we don't really, when it comes to sex education, you don't really necessarily sit down with somebody coming from your ethnic background who sits down with you and says, oh, by the way, this, that. But also, we are very multicultural. So there's different religions. And I think the schools, they fear because there's so many religions, and parents have been known to go on strike, protesting outside the schools, and the news gets involved, and you don't really want bad press, as everyone knows. But I think it's important for us to find a cure. But in your own words, why do we need to find a cure?
Yeah, of course. So although antiretroviral therapy is an effective way of reducing the HIV viral load, and so antiretroviral therapy, what we call ART for short, that is the main HIV medication. It's a combination of antiretroviral therapies that can reduce HIV's viral load. And so, although that is very effective, it doesn't cure HIV because you still have a very low amount of viral load that is, although it's undetectable, it still has the chance to rebound if people were to stop taking their medication. And unfortunately, people stopping their medication or interrupting their therapy is a lot more common than people think. And unfortunately, that can cause a rebound in HIV. And now they are once again HIV positive, and now they are able to transmit the disease again. And so that's why a cure is still important, so people do not have to take a daily pill. Also, there's associated neurological effects with the current treatment. They're called HIV-associated neurological disorders. Those are being further researched in relations to antiviral retroviral therapy. And so I think that's why the most prominent reason why a cure is needed. A cure can eradicate the virus completely. And a couple cure methods that researchers are looking at is broadly neutralizing antibodies. And so broadly neutralizing antibodies are antibodies that are isolated from a population called elite controllers. And so these elite controllers are a group of people who are naturally resistant to HIV. And so it's maybe about, I would say, less than 10% of the population who are naturally resistant to HIV. And so what scientists have found is if we are able to isolate their antibodies against HIV and maybe implement these into other people, perhaps that could be a cure strategy. That's still being worked on and further developed. Another cure strategy is working on engineering your own T cells to better recognize HIV so it can be better targeted by your immune cells. And that's an awesome therapy as well. Both of those are being looked at, and even in combination, to cure HIV. So, and hopefully those cures can work out. My biggest fear is that they won't be affordable for the communities who need it most, such as our Black and Brown communities, in our gay communities, our LGBT communities, especially because of the cost of these therapies. These costs of these therapies are, at the current moment, unaffordable. So I think HIV implementation research will be necessary to get the cost of these therapies down so people can afford these therapies. So there's not another health disparity between white people who can afford these therapies and Black and Brown or financially challenged communities that can't afford these therapies.
It's really interesting. And I think the question I have is, what would make somebody stop taking their medication or attending their therapy sessions? You know, what pushes them to
Yeah,
stop or to forget, maybe, to put it that way?
yeah, I would say oftentimes just taking a daily pill in itself can be a burden because you do have to take this pill every day for the rest of your life.
Right.
So that, in a nutshell, can be a lot for people to bear. And I would also say a lot of people have the misconception that now that they are undetectable, that they no longer need to take the medication every day. However, the medication is necessary to keep the viral load suppressed. So yeah, I would say those are the two biggest factors why people may stop treatment. Also, accessibility and affordability. Although there's a lot of ways where they've made HIV treatments free or affordable, there are still those people who are unable to access it or are unable to afford it, or maybe it's too much of a chore to do every day. Also stigma, especially when we look at African countries. If you're taking HIV medication, you are stigmatized as gay. And in countries where they are making legislation to outlaw being gay or criminalize being gay, it can be really hard to take HIV medication considering it's stigmatized with gay, and then you could be criminalized just from taking HIV medication under the assumption that only gay people are getting infected with HIV.
So I think, when you said it can be difficult to take a pill, then I thought, women go on the pill, you take the pill so you won't get pregnant, essentially. But some women do forget, don't they? And then they end up being pregnant. So, I answered my own question during, your response there. But then it's also made me think, with your research then, are you looking at your community only, or are you looking at, what is the actual focus? Are you focusing on everybody broadly, as in cis men, cis women, and LGBTQ plus? What is your focus?
Yeah, of course. So my research primarily focuses on the molecular base and the translational base.
Mm,
So I'm part of the team who's looking at engineering your own T cells so it can better target HIV, or looking at optimizing broadly neutralizing antibodies as a cure strategy. So I'm kind of at the molecular side of
mm,
research. And then hopefully once that research has been proven to be effective not only in vitro, like in cells, but
mhm,
also in animal models such as non-human primates or mouse models. And then we can advance that to clinical therapies.
mhm,
I think then we can look at, oh, will this also be effective in a cisgender people or people of the LGBT community or Black people or white people,
mhm,
and seeing who this therapy might be better. Will it disproportionately be better for some people than others? But I
mhm,
think one of the first steps is optimizing this therapy so it at least can work in someone. And so I
mhm,
think that's one of the hardest challenges in research. I think sometimes people who are outside of the field don't maybe realize how difficult a cure
mhm,
is.
mhm.
I think there's a lot of theories of people saying, oh, there's a cure out there. They just don't want to give us a cure. Trust me,
Of
no,
course.
I am working every day hard in the lab, so my community can benefit. Yeah, I think there's this huge stigma about, like, we're hiding these cures of cancer and HIV. No, that's not the case at all. It is a very difficult task to tackle these. And I'm sorry, I forgot the question. What was
No,
the question?
I think you
Sometimes I go
answered
off
it
on these
very well.
tangents.
You answered the question very well, because often, like you said, we've had people, we'll take the pandemic, for example. People are like, oh, COVID-19, they've got the cure, they cooked it up in a lab, look at them, they're killing us, pew, 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 all of that drama. And here we are now. The dust has almost settled, but again, there's long COVID symptoms. And I
Right,
think the education behind it, hence why I'm asking the question to say, what is your target audience? Because we need that education, because we have people on the internet who like to type stuff, and that
right,
usually confuses the masses as well, and then people come up with different stories, not to take away credit from anybody, don't come from me, but the scientific backing, I think, is very important for us to understand what the process is. And you've explained it very well to say, I haven't even reached the phase whereby I can say I want male mice, for example, or I want female ones. I'm
right,
still at the grounding, and that's really
right,
important for people to understand that it takes a long, long time.
right.
It's not a process that happens overnight. So you answered that very, very well. Thank you.
And
Um,
definitely
and
add to that. I would say, just to add to that really quickly, um, I would say people work their entire lifetimes and are still unable to find a cure. So not
mm,
only does it take a long time, it takes a team. And it's going to take more than just me. It's going to take an entire team of scientists collaborating to find this cure. And so I'm working with a bunch of really talented scientists here at the University of Pennsylvania to hopefully find this cure. And I think I add a unique perspective as a Black queer person, someone from the community, because I consciously remind them that, is this going to work for communities who need it most, such as our Black communities, such as our LGBT communities? And I make them go back and think about that every time we're asking questions. I make them think that, because I feel like if I wasn't there, those questions sometimes may never be raised. So, and that's why I stress representation is so important. And the process of research of both qualitative, quantitative, wet lab, the molecular research, and connecting with the community, I think is all essential to the process of finding a cure for HIV.
And I think the most important thing that you've stated is, will the normal person like me be able to afford it? Because
Right.
if I can't afford it and it's out in the market, what is the point? Which means if there's 10,000 of me, we're all going to die.
Right.
So how does that benefit the wider community out there? Which is very important, and links into diversity and inclusion, as you've said. And most of us have set in rooms whereby we're the only person when we ask a question, everyone's like, no idea. And I think
Right.
I had spaces here in the UK and on Twitter, sorry, X, and there was a clinician that jumped on, and she looks at diabetes and she's like, do you know, most doctors don't know the symptoms of diabetes when it comes to a black person, be it Somalian or black African or, you know, Caribbean. They have no idea. And
Right.
most people, you know, will work and be suffering for about 5 years until it gets really worse. And then now they're admitted in hospital, and it's difficult to reverse something that could have been caught maybe 4 years or 3 years earlier on. So I think there is, you know, it is valid what you're saying, and kudos to you, essentially.